Well, based on those facts, or what do you want to call it, the inapt regulatory standards or factors of life in general, just like the systems that have led the world to where it's always been every day. It's a choreographed essence that people tend to think is normal. They've just normalized the way in which the world, and it's not really the government, it's just the way in which private corporations and private practices have just fought to actually treat people the way that they do. It's something to do with that gap between enterprise and contract and anything that sort of ties itself in with employment, or let's just say obviously entitlement. It's never an employer that invests in an employee. No. It's always, in fact, the employee who invests in the employer. Right? Thinking about making an advance on someone and keeping them intact. Identifying needs and meet needs. For the life of who? Do you think that an employee needs your $19 an hour? Or your $25 an hour? Or your $30 an hour? Keeping a pace with what? All the marginal circumstance, all the marginal interests in the world? It's never an employer investing in an employee. It is always, in fact, an employee investing in an employer. It's no different in relationships. You talk about investment. What about the systems, the justice in the world related to entitlements? I mean, we've got a world just screaming for justice, always. Why? Because of some form of entitlement. The entitlement that's kept at pace with how the system is rolled out, or the way in which the system encapsulates us, or the way in which the system itself runs itself, right? The way it's choreographed throughout society, that orchestrated system and world that we live in, right? With that retrospective fear or that retrospective outlook that, like a day in, week out, month in, year out, decade in, century out, talks about, puts us in a position where people, like employees, in a lot of cases, like the overwhelming statistic, the majority of our world is paid like pocket money to a child, like $19 an hour before tax, $25 an hour before tax, $30 an hour before tax. We're pretty fortunate to get $30 an hour before tax. Some people are like, worth $6,000 an hour. $144,000 a goddamn day. Eat, sleep, and shine. That's like $1 million a year, or $52 million a year. Sorry, $1 million a week, $52 million a year to kick a soccer ball, have a few good feel-good interviews, and a bit of fashion, or have their boxes taken off and boiled to make a broth. But the world is set up in a way like fraudulent princes or princesses, just like people might say, a man's house is his castle. King and queen I am. What benevolent, outstanding people we really truly are. And all you might be is just a sole contractor that took over dad or mum's business. And there's a system that's constantly been in play that, like the tax system, only requires you to pay some kind of award rate or above ward rate pay bracket or wage bracket or salary or something. Some employers choose to pay their employees or their, differently. However, like commoners or common people, the system is constantly at a loss because, like the gap between the rich and the poor, or the gap between enterprise or entitlement or contracts period, you got a world that screams for justice, but that's because, like business owners or sole contractors or private corporations, private investors, managing directors, CEO, whatever the hell, they create wealth. They just have this lifestyle to boot that creates wealth. And that's how it grows on them. Their entitlement says they have a right to grow wealth and pay their employees at trend with a common award rate or a common weekly or yearly salary. And just like the so-called investment, there's a kind of a pay withholding where they'll pay you by the week in most cases and not even by the month. Why? Because they're looking for a reason in some cases to either fire you. They pay you by the week in order to withhold a monthly salary rather than have to give you 4 weeks off the bat. They only give you a week and then make a decision week by week, day in, week out, whether or not they want to retain you, what kind of money you can make for them, but you're only sort of entitled to that hourly rate or the retainer and what have you, and that's it. If the world was too busy keeping at pace with, we'll say survival, we'll say strength in numbers, there'd be no such thing as a corporate entity of wealth creation or wealth gathering. It would be fairly distributed. It'd be fairly distributed. Employees would have much more if you knew what the so-called manager or the so-called business owner or the head chairman or the goddamn general manager of major corporations, if you know what they're on, it's like we're saying, well, they're entitled to, they're on contract. Well, like those tier levels in corporate management and what have you, the entitlements, you've got the gatekeepers, the goddamn little people and all that. The world itself always suffers. And that's where half this justice problem comes into. You feel that you're entitled to keep at pace with the system, already pre-designed like sultans or sultan princes and princesses by fraudulent activity that live in a fucking beautiful fucking lovely fucking resort or something of power and prestige. But again, like people, like power, like percentages, like prejudices, like the predicament and the penalty, why would the world necessarily care about providing people a blank check in which to operate? It just relates to the amount of crime being committed. When you give people a blank check to operate, regardless of how the government can regulate those big money earners or those big revenue busters, you know, it gives them a blank check to commit crime and an infringement. That's why the world screams justice, and it isn't just about the money. It's about security. It's about investment. It's about the system itself. It's about lifestyle choices. It's about that in which, like an embellished lifestyle, can't sort of be, I guess, you know, taken out of context, because everything is to be kept within context. You could talk about teenagers after school having to go straight into a military boot camp in order to suffice being paid for the dole. But what is that suggesting? That Social Security welfare payments is some kind of modest wage, even when they weren't actually in a boot camp? There was no system in place paying them? What is that then if it costs Social Security in Australia $191 billion a year? That's $191,000 million. Is that like saying they're receiving a modest wage for, is that some kind of prostitute severance payment? Providing a shadow defence papers or some false administration to provide for concentration camps or bloody, you know, observatory labs or whatever, fields. It's all a novelty approach to bloody, you know, that's paid by the taxpayer to feed bloody novelty writers, book writers, media journalists, false papers. They're acting like it's not real money spent in certain mandatory manner. But that's like, could you imagine that over 10 years? That's like nearly $2 trillion. On what, defence budget? What, mandatory spending? You must be paying people this modest wage through Social Security in Australian dollars for a reason. To forge administration, forge paper, use them for, to keep life in their bones while you study them or some shit. Make you look awesome. But that's no different in the goddamn workforce. Anybody under $100,000 a year, and like 3/4 of the country earn no more than 75 grand a year in Australia. Anyone under 100 grand is doing it really tough. You talk about economic depression, whether it's a socio factor or whether it's a political agenda, period. That's why it cost the government $191 billion a year. Because economic depression would be a political agenda. But all the politicians are the power of the people, representing the people, mediated between people in general and private businesses, private corporation, those conducting concentration camps, observation labs, fake ass scientists who aren't even, they're compounded away from society. They're too busy studying frogs or studying, let's say, rats drowning in a bucket of piss to discover adrenaline. Like what? The scientist doesn't even have any adrenaline? You got to watch a rat drown in a bucket of piss to be able to discover adrenaline? Oh, we found it. We discovered adrenaline. You probably only go looking for adrenaline because you don't even have any. That's why you just like to be compounded away from society, call yourself a scientist, but we know how smart you are. You'll just cry for funding every goddamn year. Private funding, government funding. Because just like your weekly wage and your annual salary, you don't want any other job. You need to be compounded away from society. You're sort of scared of it. That's why you concentrate on frogs and rats. It's a far cry from reality being encapsulated in a planet where you can't even drive people up the fucking wall. You wonder what it is to recall, or what memory is, or adrenaline, or to get off your fat flat ass and actually do something in life rather than stare through a fucking microscope at a freaking screen, or sift a fine-tooth comb through everything. What? To come up with what? The fuck will you come up with doing that? You will come up with a modest wage, a lifestyle to boot, and an itinerary that finds you saying, we nearly fixed it, we nearly fixed it, we nearly got it, we nearly got it. And you just keep people waiting. Keep people believing you're going to solve it or that you got the fucking cure for cancer. But you need that fucking money rolling over, otherwise you will be out of employment real quick, kicking the can down the street, man. About leads and the fucking loads, bloody heaps, and oh my god. You ain't got none of it. It's all part of keeping at pace with your goddamn life. Which, mind you, is rather freaking slow to date. You need that money rolling over. We can talk about money all we want, but there's like this kind of intellectual property at stake. There's massive contract at stake when it comes to the education of citizens in general. It only takes an imagination to spark something. Just like innovation, ideas, what have you. Current Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull talking about innovation, ideas, intelligence. And yet you talk about billionaires. Or the kinds of born billionaires where today we're seeing certain billionaires rise up in the world in certain areas or fields. You wouldn't have necessarily believed it had you not seen, whether it be their intelligence, their excellence, through certain intellectual property, create the likes of J.K. Rowling when it comes to writing friggin' novels. Or Bill Gates himself, or friggin' Mark Zuckerberg. What kind of fucking people come to Australia, the land of occupation? You will be a multi-millionaire before you know it. That's not how it translates in Australia. It only takes an imagination or a goddamn a bit of intellectual property. It kickstarts multi-million-dollar businesses that roll out to be multi-billion-dollar services with all the retention and all the goddamn chess pins and the decoration. And the forged reality that says, oh yeah, this reflects my friggin' life. We do this because it reflects our ability to be able to pick stuff and think stuff. When you're probably just looking down on people breathing over their fucking necks, sowing potatoes. Until the third eye, the fucking potato, talks to you. And you snatch it like a fucking state asset grab, and it makes you look awesome. When there's no friggin' assets here as it is. So what kinds of intellectual types these days become billionaires in the face of humanity? What is it to be entitled to be a born multi-millionaire, period? What if you are a born billionaire and they're very few and far between? What is it to be a certain systems where you've just provided people through sole contractual rights and privileges to operate within, you know, the industries and pay employees at a very, you know, flat rate? Just keeps them getting up. It's like having to pay a child pocket money. Give me an hour. Who the hell gives up an hour of their goddamn time for $19 with qualification, or $25 with qualification, or certain experience? You'll know them by their goddamn seats, or their goddamn schemes, or their goddamn percentage bargaining skills capacities. A lot of people in their private enterprises and whatnot, being as secreted as they are, they have a slave labour attached to them. They have a cheapskate freeloading capacity to them. They actually just require bums on seats. Sometimes it just requires subjectivity. It requires some kind of inapt regulatory standard. But then, of course, like that wouldn't never, ever in its life, occupy. I mean, some governments, some people actually turned a blind eye to their own unwarranted criminal activity, You only got to get in the lives of people, get into their private life, have a beer conversation, know a bit about them. Before you know it, you just smother and scheme it all over them. You got to have amazing access to people before you can stuff their life over, and have a tremendous application towards them in order to stuff their life over. It's how paedophiles or rapists or perverts or whoever tend to work. But you know what it's like when you're just sort of slave laboured for a cheap minimum wage or slave labour. Shopping centres don't have any goddamn jobs, so they give people a cleaner's job and a goddamn trolley collector's job. Well, that's not true. You say, sanity is very important. Well, why do you pay cleaners minimum rate? Did some middle-aged woman with no job come up to you and say, please, sir, I was just canvassing. I really need a job if you got anything. Anything, huh? You want to scrub my toilets, wash my feet, be a domestic spot cleaner? I'll give you nothing. No, you got nothing. Got to pay that bills. Got nothing. You want something? It's the last thing they think of. It reflects their attention. Again, like spreading the wealth, or what it is to keep everything evenly spread. If you paid cleaners to the same tune as what you did your middle gate employees, right? Then you would have such a cleanly, sanitized environment that you couldn't mistake where your best interests are kept as a manager, as a business front owner, as a proprietor, anything. It's at the top of the list. Cleanliness is next to godliness. And you pay the minimum wage like it ain't worth nothing. Like trolley collectors. I've got a foolproof plan to actually wipe out trolley collecting positions right across the country at all major supermarkets. The old classic saying that says, put things back where you find it. Now, if people are able to utilise a trolley and walk it to their car, I'm dead set certain, potato in the end, right? I'm dead set certain that you can actually walk that trolley back to Woolworths, and you should wipe out trolley collectors and just give the security guards powers like ticket officers or police officers to write out on the spot fines to people who leave trolleys behind. You say some cases you can't manage putting a trolley back, but you only do that because you've set yourself up to believe that's the case, that somebody will pick your fucking littering or your litteraling behind. That's what it is to make a mess of the place and trash the place and make an excuse to give people jobs. Put things back where you find it. There'd only be a few cases where people simply cannot because of some disability factor or incapacity, at the discretion of the fine writing officer. Right? Therefore, you should be taking it back to where you find it. The few that are left over, Woolworths themselves or Coles Supermarket or whoever chooses to let people use trolleys to the value of $490 each, those trolleys are worth $500 each. You just leave it behind, right? Then that's where the Woolworths staff or the Coles staff, supermarket staff can have their own employees take 15 minutes off and go around scour the goddamn supermarket and just get the few that might be left over. Otherwise, the enforcement is you use a trolley, you put it simply back where you find it. In most cases, they'll go ahead and take it to their car and put the trolleys in their car. Now, why do they take the goddamn trolley back and then go back to their car and then go? Because it just makes it out to be that a car, no matter how much that car is, $33,000, right, drive away, no more to pay, is the most expensive grocery trolley in the world. Given the way in which you treat somebody else's goddamn trolley to the tune of $500. That's what it is. So by law, you should be required to put those trolleys back where you find it to ensure that it's, and then, of course, for the few that are left over, Woolworths or Coles Supermarket, they can retain their own costs by being able to go after the trolleys, their own cost, wipe out trolley collecting business right across the country, and have very few but very specific cases of where, you know, people were found breaking the law. Because a lot of cases, most of those goddamn trolleys are used appropriately, let's say, by the people who use and venture into that shopping centre, but you've set it up that way. You think it's normal. It is not normal. You've trashed the system. You trashed the system to think you can pay people flat rate. You've trashed the system to make it think that you've just got to create wealth and do nothing for your goddamn employees or community or anyone. It's about being able to keep at pace with your lavish hospitality or lavish lifestyle. And even people with a few $1,000,000 aren't even rich. You know, in life, your first million spent anyway, your first couple of million spent. Things cost money, it's just the way it is. You can't fool numbers. Sponsorship points to every goddamn purchase product. Get real. So then you've got, like, you know, of course in Australia to this degree, the abuse of power, the abuse of privilege. What it is to be a Generation X, today's leaders. And for 25 to 30 years, no court provisions. All relates to liability insurances. That which they're not even documenting what happened. Generation X is like X marks the spot on a historical map that says nothing happened. Like subsequent of World War II. I thought that after war, there's supposed to be no credit. If it was during war, you can get credit. But when the war's over, there's no credit. Don't come asking for credit when the war's over. Then why the hell in Australia is there so many credit-reliant people? Because the war has been an economical, ideological, flatline approach to wiping out people's financial entitlement, taking away their assets. So you put the credit in place because you've just been constantly wiping them out through mortgage options, housing options, mortgage properties, portfolios. You expect young people to put a little minimum deposit on a house, might be $20,000, right? And they've taken out loans to the tune of $500,000. A lot of police officers have loans to that effect, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're the first ones out handing fines for $350 here, or 3 demerit points plus $350, or a here fine there, which doesn't go back to the transport department because they think that handing over $300-400 a fucking week for nothing is just normal life. It's just normal. They set the system up. It creates a barrage. It creates a fucking beguilement. It creates a begrudgment. It creates a misappropriatism or a goddamn inappropriate form of conduct and repetition, justifiable as it never would be seen if you're too busy incriminating. And that creates the fact, not the claim. See what I mean? The claim. You've got to have a claim. If you want to have a claim, you've got to put an application in and be responsible for that claim. You don't just push people into the circle and say, you must take the fall for me. You must pay this. You must follow the goddamn costume. You must be this character. You must lay down your fucking minimally paid lifestyle for me and my country, my people. People that don't even make it back from war, paid on minimum wage because you can't just simply lose your job as a minister or a departmental head. Hey, it's better for you to lose your job than any one person lose their life. They might want to come back from war and have they might want to have a life in politics. They might have an interest in their electorate, an interest in people, an interest in politics, an interest in something. But it's more expensive to lose a fucking minister or a departmental head or figure than it is to lose a soldier playing a goddamn bargaining chip or a gambling chip on minimum wage to create like a big friggin' massive wall of defense against your misappropriatism act, which in a lot of neighboring countries would see certain politicians or departmental heads or people in general either spending life in jail or even the death penalty. So you can see why soldiers are paid minimum wage, to create a massive defense through statistic to protect dishonest people, if that's the case. You talk about factoring it in, penciling it in. Young people are forced to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of loans and break their back their whole life and pay back what? Sometimes interest just on a house alone to $280,000 interest. Who the hell, what kind of young kid with a future in their outlook gives over $280,000 interest in the goodness of their heart through generosity? No one does. Well, then looking at it forward rather than afterward, haven't you learnt? Why are you giving that three-piece suit wearing cheesy bastard working for the freaking bank or insurance company $280,000 interest out of the goodness of your heart, young man, young woman? Bullshit. You don't even rub off on yourself that well. You don't even treat yourself that well. Where's your personal savings to that tune? Well, you just gave it away. They tricked you into it. They made you think it is normal. We're born into a world where we all have access to the same things, but nowhere near the retained investment. We're not getting it because the wealth is being ripped and plucked out of us like an inducement, like an extraction. You're fooled. You have been duped and seduced, the Bible says, which in short is what's called an inducement. You silly idiot. $280,000 after 15, 20 years. Why don't you pay rent? Oh, rent's dead rent. No, it isn't. Mortgage payments are dead rent. Well, what do you mean? You just gave over $280,000 interest free out of the goodness of your heart. That's dead rent. And then the equity drops on the house by 10% once you own it. Not to mention the stamp duty and all the frivolous crap. You're an idiot. But that's the kind of information I suppose I don't want you to know, because that's where the systems and this big bloody employee versus employer, or vice versa, has us duped. They don't want you to know this. They want access to you so they can stuff you over. Therefore, it creates the indemnity. A common indemnity is what's required to solve the puzzle. And it always happens through innocence, because it's guilt by association versus innocence in beauty. There's nothing more beautiful than innocence itself. There's nothing more guilty than association, or people through collective numbers being seen live and adjudicate their life the way in which they do. Civil liability factors, knowing like, you could have a shock and awe campaign or a wavelength of unscrupulous proportions right at the heart of class action warfare. Or United Nations jurisdictions. You probably don't even have any jurisdiction now, requiring the UN to hear you while you sit on the UN Security Council here, Australia. Australia being the only united nation in the goddamn world, some goddamn nanny state, one size fits all legislation policy. If we did what we did in other countries, most countries, a lot of people just in common in general would be seen in a palliative care bed for playing people like a fucking nanny state gangster, or a Generation X just crying because you can't provide. You can't provide the document or the goddamn honesty that sees you, even through training, coaching and development of our staff, sees you pilfering the public, forcing them to ring you up or train you or coach you through that indemnity or those mistakes being made that you actually falsify through regulatory compliance factors, that you mail them out red letter documentation that's false, force them to ring you, argue the point, then you're able to bloody use it to help coach, train and develop your corporation to work around the pros and the cons and the tricks of the trade, to gain more access and power to people's lives, to stuff them over. That's where economic depression comes into play. Those regulatory compliance factors, being the precious little employee, being the precious someone, the precious one that can't afford to lose your job, the precious one that can't afford to be in trouble, the precious one that can't afford to struggle, the precious one that can't afford not to pay your mortgage, the precious one that can't afford not to pay your car, the precious one that, stole copyright and distributed it to that effect like wildfire, the scene intellectual property at your level of decoration or goddamn reputation. You're awesome. You made it. You already published it. You're cashing in insurance claims. You're stealing identity. You're not even paying people for the administration fee behind providing you 100% of identification before applying for a line of credit, only to be declined, but you'll make sure you'll charge them if they get approved. You only had to go source some lender, but let's say they did get approved. All you wanted was the 100 points of ID. That could be identity theft, but you won't even pay them. No goddamn respect for people past or present or what it takes. I heard these days identification, 100 points of ID is a massive. It's a massive friggin' it's leverage in the credit world. You can stuff someone's whole life over, but you keep handing out those applications like bread and butter, wanting people to put them in, only to decline them through false repetition, false consultancy. You people will actually pay lawyers and consultants through advice before you even decide to pay someone compensation. Or you'll pay for lawyers or solicitation to protect your unprepossessive ugly asses, precious as you are, to keep you out of court, like as if the world's designed that way, to protect criminals, or pay for criminals, daddy and mummy's budding little blossoming professionals, or those precious ones that can't afford to struggle. Hey, it's my boy. I want him back on the team. But Carmichael Hunt was found with $30,000 of cocaine. I don't care. He's one of mine. I want him back on the team. He's one of mine. My boy's going to get the same opportunity as everybody else. But he ratted out on everybody in the team. I want him back. He's one of mine. He's on contract. Right? It's an enterprise here. Franchise. I want him back. Even in the face of all the people around the world, especially in the face of all the people around the world. Well, based on that fact, those facts, or what do you want to call it, the inapt regulatory standards or factors.